The Nebraska Voter ID Act was introduced in the Nebraska State Legislature by State Senator Charlie Jansen. It would require new voter ID requirements of government-issued photo identification to be shown at polling places for every election. Government-issued photo identification could be a driver's license, a state identification card, any other document issued by the federal government. Supporters believe the bill is crucial to protecting the election process from fraud. They're worried about people attempting to steal the election somehow through identity theft. Opponents of the bill believe there's no evidence of voter fraud in Nebraska, and they think it would be more difficult to vote, and also that it would disproportionately negatively affect turnout of Democratic-leaning constituencies. You'll see a lot of conservative organizations and figures in support, and in opposition, you'll see Democratic progressive groups, candidates, and figures. Right now, we need more and currently lacking information on this. But we do know that younger and older Americans are much less likely to have a driver's license. National data also suggests that people of color, the young, the elderly, and disabled, those in urban areas, and the poor, are the most likely to lack this access to government IDs. Based on political research, we can safely say that almost all of these aforementioned groups are more likely to support the Democratic Party, Democratic candidates, and liberal progressive policies. I think this is a really interesting connection that can be made between this and the voter ID bill as a modern way of disenfranchising voters. I've established earlier that various groups are less likely to have the proper identification, and that most of those groups are more likely to support certain candidates, parties, and political ideals. If these groups are stopped from going through the voting process, it would lead to a very significant difference in Nebraskan voting and Nebraskan political outcomes.
So most meeting effectiveness research focuses on either design characteristics or managerial practices. Design characteristics include structural aspects such as agenda usage, refreshments, or lighting of the meeting space. Managerial practices focus on open communication, task-oriented focus, systematic approach, or timeliness. So we suspect that interaction before a meeting will have spillover effects on the meeting itself. This mechanism may be referred to as the ripple effect. So according to the affective events theory, events occur in the workplace that directly influence emotions and moods of employees, as well as subsequent attitudes and behaviors. So for this study, we suggest that maybe the positive feelings that occur from the result of small talk would be able to ripple through the meeting and create a long-lasting effect. So due to the ripple effect, pre-meeting talk may have the ability to impact meeting effectiveness above and beyond the previously studied good meeting procedures. So the sample for the study, we included participants that were working adults who regularly attended work meetings. The final sample included 252 participants. So here's the table of our correlations. As you can see here, that small talk, work talk, meeting preparatory talk, and shop talk are all significantly correlated with meeting effectiveness. We used regression analysis to further test the relationship between pre-meeting talk and meeting effectiveness while controlling for demographic control variables, tenure, age, and job level. We found that small talk was the only significant predictor.
So I started doing some research about different types of willow trees and willow branches, because I really wanted to include willow branches in my project. There's two stages that I did with soaking the willow branches in water. First was in a rain gutter, and I'd close the ends off. And the second was in a large bath. So you have to soak them for quite some time, and then they become pliable. So then, in the meantime, I started building my base structure, which I used plywood boards, and I cut them in circle shapes. I had to screw them together and glue them together. So then in the meantime, while after I stained the base, I had to do my template for the different shapes for the willow branches. So I used deck screws and drilled them in, and I had to draw out 2 different designs and then squish them into the little shapes that I had made. At first I wasn't that good feeling about it because it was so bare and you could see right through it, and I felt so distressed, as you can see there. But after I started adding more, I felt better about it, and there it looks a little bit better. It wasn't quite there yet though. I found some twine and I stained it and wrapped it a million times around this metal thing to dry, and then I balled it up in this little ball, and I started wrapping it around the tree to give it a lot more of a horizontal line quality. There are so many verticals with the branches that I need something more to go around it. And then I attached the leaves onto the tree, which is the final stage of it. And now for the final unveiling, this is the first time I've shown anybody a picture of it or anyone has really seen it. So there it is. And I'm really satisfied with it. I never thought that it would turn out quite like that, but it's just everything, you know, it has its own life almost, like it's actually growing. So.
My project did not simply consist of studying the work of other composers. While I've been doing so for most of my life, it was my turn to have their job. Being at a Catholic university, I figured I could work with the Catholic Mass. And so, I composed a setting of that Latin Mass consisting of the Kyrie, Gloria, Sanctus, and Agnus Dei. All of these use the original Latin and Greek text, accompanied by original music. I elected to use the Missa Brevis, literally the short Mass form. In this form, each prayer is contained in one movement. Aside from the four-part choir, I included strings, as many chamber pieces use, and I also wanted to include one of my own instruments, in this case, the organ. In addition to this, I wanted to have a reverent instrument included, which could create some interesting texture. I chose the oboe, actually, two of them. Oboists have always impressed me with their ability to play very long lines with such a gentle tone. My approach to the composition process was simple. Write down whatever I really like. My ideas always come from improvisations rather than a well-thought-out or mathematical approach. Another compositional technique that I use that is used in sacred music is the set of three. I used each phrase of the text 3 times, making each distinct with a breath from the whole choir. This total of 9 musical phrases supports the text in a way that simply reciting the words 3 times cannot.
So the purpose of the study was to fulfill a hole in spacing effect research. Since 1885, we have come a long way in understanding the theory behind this research. However, it's never really been applied in a practical academic setting before. I came up with 3 different study break conditions. My hypothesis was supported by Roediger in 1975 that due to interference, participants in the control condition where they're passively taking a break will score higher on their final test in regards to the other conditions. I had individuals come into the lab in groups of 2 where they were presented with study material for 10 minutes. What I found was that individuals in the reading and MRT conditions trended towards scoring higher than individuals in the control condition. This is exactly the opposite of what I predicted. I found a possible explanation in an interesting place with Alzheimer's patients. A common treatment method in Alzheimer's patients is engaging in cognitive stimulation therapy. Cognitive stimulation therapy works on the hypothesis that engaging in mental exercise serves to form associative cortices in your brain. And when you engage in stimulation therapy, you actually increase metabolic activity and you increase blood flow to these cortices, which enhances cognition.
Over the summer, what I did is a master's review of the literature concerning St. Maximus Confessor, trying to get a much fuller picture of Maximus and the present state of studies concerning him. Maximus became involved in North Africa, as I said, in the controversy as a debater. He championed the movement against monotheism, eventually culminating in Pope Martin I bringing him in on the Lateran Council of 649 in Rome, which sided with Maximus in regards to Maximus's theology of the two wills of Christ rather than the one will. What we're interested in today is the symphonic holism of Maximus Confessor's theology. That is to say, how the various themes present in his theology are interwoven together into a beautiful polyphony, a consistent flowing experience, at the heart of which is the incarnation. What I'm trying to paint a picture here is how Maximus's theology progresses. So it moves from point to point to point, and it flows. But if you don't have the picture from before, it's a little hard to figure out where we're at in the present. What I'm trying to show is the intertextuality and the interweaving of themes in the writings of Maximus Confessor. Everything comes back to the incarnation. This style, this architecture of Maximus's theology is part of what makes Maximus relatively difficult to understand, but it's also part of what makes me love working with his theology.
And so one of these competitive situations is for mates. You had to compete for your mate, and you had to, in some way, demonstrate that you were of higher social rank. And people of lower social rank be more prone to develop eating disorders, as well as eating disordered behaviors. And so I essentially related a bunch of different emotional and cognitive factors that are related to eating disorders as well as depression, to kind of get that link between social ranking theory as it applies to depression and eating disorders, and then relating that social exchange of where you're selecting a mate. So essentially what I thought was going to happen is we would have, the blue is the mate value inventory, so your self-rating, as well as the ideal and the attainable long-term partner, and all of the black is essentially all of the eating disorder symptoms and behaviors. So what I thought was going to happen, essentially all those eating disorder behaviors and symptoms were going to be directly related to the ideal long-term partner, your attainable long-term partner, and your self-rating. Anorexia we actually found to be positively correlated with your self-rating, so those who have higher anorexic tendencies would evaluate themselves to be of higher social rank. Perfectionism, the trend was still in the expected direction, so those with higher perfectionism would evaluate themselves to be of lower social rank, lower worth. We still found some significant relationships, but some of the relationships kind of, essentially all the relationships we found in the self-rating kind of decreased. The way I kind of conceptualized it, as opposed to having a direct impact on your mate selection, it has an indirect impact. So
I examined two novels and gender binaries within them. As humans, we tend to define the world completely in binaries, in extremes and in opposites. So we can't really define anything without sort of knowing what its opposite is. Really, our gender identity is probably one of the most important aspects of our identity. It's how we show ourselves to others. So in the two novels that I'm studying, in one the people are androgynous, and in the other one the main character is intersex. So two novels that sort of speak to these gender issues and the binaries are two that I chose to compare. And the first one is called The Left Hand of Darkness by a very famous science fiction author, Ursula K. Le Guin. The other book is very different. It takes place on Earth. It's called Middlesex by Jeffrey Eugenides. First binaries that I found was the concept of masculine linearity versus feminine circularity. In The Left Hand of Darkness, it's very much different. There's much more of a balance, and I really attribute it to the fact that there is no gender. So there are no gender roles on this planet. They're much more concerned with their presence in society than this constant progress. And what I kind of learned, I guess, ultimately from this, is that although we as humans define the world in binaries, and it's pretty much impossible to ever take away this viewpoint, it really does help to examine what it would be like to live in perhaps an androgynous world, to try to take a step back from our very engendered perspectives and look at things in a different light.
So my research, I identified and explored factors that prevent single low-income women participating in the program and the barriers that they face accessing healthcare. Just the data of the participants I interviewed, there were 31 total. Their average age was 41. They reported having between 1 and 5 children. This program has been going since 2009, and they graduate 4 classes a year of about 12 to 15 people. So I interviewed 2 that graduated in 2009, 8 from 2010, 12 from 2011, and 9 from 2012. So I got a nice mix of participants. The results of my interviews were that 23 out of 31 reported that they continued using this budgeting system and saving receipts, which showed that this program really works in keeping women on the financial track. It's just not you go in for a class and then you just kind of put everything aside and you get back to that same situation that you're in the first place. In 95 instances, negative health symptoms and health issues were reported as reduced in frequency because of the program. And these are just some of the issues that were reported, and there are so many more. But things like acid reflux, hair loss, irritability, smoking, loss of sleep, acne, all these things were reported as reduced because of the program. Once women found that they could get their finances on track, they figured out, I'm less stressed, it's time for me to get my health on track. 22 out of the 31 interviewees said that they reduced their fast food consumption because of cost. They were looking at their spreadsheet, finding out how much they were spending, and knew that if they were planning meals instead, they could save money. And just to say to the success of the program, 19 out of 31 unprompted reported the importance of their coach, the importance of someone keeping them on track, someone there for financial support. 12 out of 31 participants reported it was helpful to know they weren't alone. So they're going into these classes with women who are in similar financial situations, and they get support from them.